Musical talent, that elusive quality that seems a mystery to those of us who don't appear to have it. Where does it come from? Do you have to be born with a special musical gift? Or show great ability at a very young age? Or is it something that many more of us could develop if we worked at it? Lambros Lambrou is now at Cambridge. He showed an early interest in music and started piano lessons at the age of 8.
I remember going through the first few books reasonably quickly. I used to be rather impatient with the teacher because I think she wanted me to slow down perhaps a bit.
His parents and teachers recognized Lambros's ability and thought he would benefit from attending a specialist music school. Lambros did very well generally at the school. He now studies mathematics as well as maintaining his musical career.
I think I benefited from the disciplines there. You need discipline just to practice a piece. I mean, everybody likes playing music at first, but once you're playing the same piece over and over again, so I would say 100 times, it requires a certain amount of, well, pig-headedness just to keep playing the thing.
Lambros gives regular recitals and is one of the country's best young performers of the work of modern composers like Messiaen. But where does his ability come from? Until the 1980s, there had been relatively little research into the origins of musical ability. Since then, a number of psychological studies have been done, mainly in Britain and America, as researchers strive for greater understanding of this complex area. How far can these studies help us explain the talent of a gifted young musician? Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is probably regarded as the Western world's most famous young musician. Encouraged by his father, he performed in public from a very young age. Wolfgang, who will be 7 years old next February, is such an extraordinary phenomenon that one is hard put to believe what one sees with one's eyes. But what is really incredible is to see him improvise for an hour on end, and in doing so give rein to the inspiration of his genius and to a mass of enchanting ideas.
A lot of people say, surely someone like Mozart is so totally exceptional that he must have been born totally different from the rest of us. And I think the answer to that is yes, up to a point, but it's not really quite so simple as that. There's some very difficult questions about the role of biological factors and genetic factors and the role of other influences such as the child's experience and environmental factors. Questions about the different extent to which these are influential. One thing we can be certain of is that although, yes, there are strong biological influences, these are probably a lot more complicated and less straightforward than we think they are.
If you take the notion of gift, there are several, I think, stories that are based on anecdote, almost mythologies. If you take classic stories like some of the great composers, they were gifted, they were, genius or whatever. When you begin to unpack their stories, obviously we haven't got great amounts of details, you find that there was a huge amount of care, attention, work, learning, skill acquisition in there.
Understanding the development of gifted children in general has long been a challenge for psychologists. Much research has been done looking at children in schools like Cademore International School for Gifted Children on the edge of Peebles in Scotland. One study that has had considerable influence is a longitudinal project carried out by Professor Joan Freeman. For over 10 years, she followed the progress of 210 children, 70 of whom were designated by psychologists to be gifted or of high ability. 12 of these gifted children were musicians. Professor Freeman is also a governor of Cademore School and visits regularly to see the children at work.
You can see quite clearly that the milestones are earlier, usually, for children of very, very high IQ than they are for children of lower IQ.
Donne-moi une pièce, une pièce. Merci. Alors,
The milestones I'm referring to are when children first walk and talk and speak. And for the gifted, the ones to look for are often physical, but also mental, like concentration and memory are quite outstanding in gifted children.
But Joan Freeman also found that dedication and persistence were important.
Practice is essential in anything that any human being wants to do. It goes through everything, whether it's language learning, chemistry, music. And if one is to move from being a novice, an apprentice learner, to being an expert, there are thousands and thousands of hours required to go from being somebody who puts their first finger on the piano to somebody who's on the concert platform.
Joan Freeman's longitudinal research showed persistence and motivation to be important factors in children continuing to show their ability in later years. But following children through to adulthood isn't the only way of researching the development of gifted children. Michael Howe is Professor of Psychology at Exeter University. He also is interested in the nature of exceptional ability and has recently been studying young musicians.
When you see a young person do something outstandingly well, the natural reaction I think we have is to say, wow, isn't that wonderful, isn't that amazing? As a psychologist, I think we should try and take as well a slightly more scientific approach and try and say to ourselves, let's see if we can understand what's going on, let's see if we can explain things better. Why is this happening? And when we do that, we tend to concentrate less perhaps on the things that are amazing and look more at the similarities. What is it that people who do things outstandingly well perhaps have in common with the rest of us?
Together with other researchers from the University of Kiel, Michael Howe has been conducting research into the development of young musicians in Britain. Joan Freeman's study took a longitudinal approach, following children over a number of years. In contrast, this research takes a large number of children of high musical ability and looks back over their lives to see if there are common factors in their development. It's a retrospective approach that has been used by other researchers in this area. The gifted musicians in Joan Freeman's study were at Cheetham School of Music in Manchester, and it's to here that Professor Howe and his colleagues came to do their research. In a number of studies done over the last few years, they've interviewed over 160 pupils and many of the parents about the children's musical histories. Lambros Lambrou was one of the sample. The school prides itself on identifying would-be pupils who will benefit from the hard-working but enjoyable atmosphere.
We can nurture, we can encourage, we can provide facilities which actually make it possible for that spark of musical excitement to come alive. But I think it's got to be there before they come to Cheetham's.
The school has an international reputation and is one of the largest schools in Britain for pupils of musical ability. Tuition fees are paid by the Department for Education. Every year, Michael Brewer, head of the music school, and his staff sift through the inquiries and audition hopeful applicants. Only about 4% of initial inquirers make it to the school. So by choosing Cheetham's as the venue for their studies, the psychologists were assured that all their sample had already been through a tough selection process.
Potential is so hard to judge in the very young. Obviously, the longer a child has been learning an instrument, the more you can relate the progress to what has been taught and what opportunities have been had. So we have to take very great care of auditioning the youngest children. Some of those who, at the age of 7 or 8, you'd say are born musicians, may not develop that because of their own motivation, because of their own interest. We look for the time when the face lights up, we look for the brightness in the eyes. We actually separate off in the audition the skills which are acquired and are the result of teaching, and the innate abilities which people have, which could be called creativity, the ability to speak individually as a personality through music. It includes musicianship, a quick, alert mind which can respond to musical shapes and phrases and so on, and a good musical ear, the ability to hear it in tune, to respond to rhythms and textures. And then above all that, really, if someone is going to embark on a musical career involving a specialist school like this, we need to have rather a strong individual personality. Right, sing me a nice juicy C sharp. Are you sure that's not D flat?
Same thing.
Same note? Oh, sorry.
The evidence for what great musicians could do when they were the age of these young children often depends on people's recollections of events that took place many years earlier. In this study, the psychologists wanted as much information as possible while the children and their parents were still close to the events.
In the first phase of the study, we were really concentrating on finding out as much as we could from young people themselves and encouraging them to talk and tell us about all the kinds of things that they saw as being important in their own lives.
The biographical method is basically structured reminiscence. You can get systematic, detailed information on a large number of lives in a comparable form and begin to tease out those factors which are important and determine success against those which inhibit it. Of course, there are all kinds of biases which can creep in. We have a number of ways of countering that. The first one is what you might call triangulation, asking two different people about the same events. So in this case, we ask the young people, and independently, without telling the parents what the young people said, we ask the parents. And if their stories agree, then we have a pretty good idea that this is near the truth. In about 95% of the cases, the children and their parents agreed. Some of the questions we asked were subjective questions about the child's feelings. Now, clearly the child is the only authority in that case. In other cases, when the issue was factual, like when was a certain examination taken, we trusted the parents.
In the first stage of the studies, the researchers interviewed the pupils in a semi-structured format, allowing the younger children to talk freely about their early musical experiences. Alison Mallard is 12.
I'd always wanted to play the flute. Since when I was 3, I think I'd said I want to play the flute, and that was it. And Mum and Dad tried to substitute it with the recorder, but I wouldn't. I insisted on playing the flute, and so eventually when I was 8, they bought me a cheap flute and sent me off to a flute teacher, and he said that I'd be really good. And so they thought, well, you know, there's no harm in trying to get her further.
I've always felt that it's Alison's personality that's made her so musical. She's extremely emotional as a person. She was a tantrumy, difficult toddler. She's got the makings of a very tantrumy, difficult adolescent as well, you know. And I think that that's partly why she's a good musician.